My name is Tim Barrett. As you don't already know me, I'm one of the co-PIs for the Mellon seminar, and it's my pleasure to be able to introduce Jim Canary. Jim is head of conservation at the Lilly Library at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, where he has been for 31 years. He is adjunct faculty in the Henry Hope School of Fine Arts teaching book structures. He began studying Tibetan and Mongolian language and culture in the early 70s and has traveled extensively in the Himalayan region for more than 35 years, researching papermaking and documenting papermakers, scribes, and printers. He was a founding member of the Paper Road Tibet Project, working to research and revitalize Tibetan papermaking in Tibet, and also worked with the International Tibetan Archive Preservation Project in Lhasa, carrying out conservation work and training. I can assure you that there are very few people in the book arts community as committed as Jim Canary. We've been talking a lot today about the body and the book, the various connections. In preparing book boards for tomorrow's workshop, Jim chopped off one of his fingertips. So tomorrow's workshop, the models you make, will be very special. Please join me in welcoming Jim Canary.
Thank you, Tim, and everybody else who's put so much work into organizing this. I think it's an amazing collection of talks and people you've pulled together, and it's always nice to see so much interest in this topic. Tim, I wanted to do something on Tibetan books, and Tim said, well, why don't you do palm leaves and birch bark, which are really not my area, but it was very nice because it allowed me to go to Thailand and Cambodia and do some research in an area that I was not all that familiar with. So I thank you for that opportunity, and I'm going to continue that study. But I thought we should put a little bit in here about Tibetan materials. Let's see, how do I do this? Yeah. So Tibet is located in an area surrounded by mountains, very, very rugged terrain. Somewhat isolated, but on the other hand, there's always been trade through those areas, trade in material goods, but more importantly for us, trade in ideas and in spirituality. The Tibetans, of course, got the Buddhist religion from India, also from China, but the thing I'm going to be talking about today is their book culture and where that originated. So primarily, as we've seen so many examples of the poti form for the palm leaf structure, the Tibetans adapted that. In the 7th century, King Chonsen Gampo sent a minister to develop a script, adapt a script from Indian languages, and make it so that they could have a written language in Tibet. And you can see this is a calligrapher writing Uchen script. There are many different scripts in Tibet, and I'll have examples tomorrow in the workshop for you to see some of those different scripts. But you can see he's writing with a nyugu, a bamboo pen, and writing on paper. If you go back to this picture, you don't see many palm trees growing in Tibetan areas. So, one of the things that's also adapted from the Indian manuscripts that they saw were these methods of kind of tacketing loosely, non-adhesive layers of board together to form covers. So this one I'm showing now is threads going through 3 palm leaf manuscripts to hold it together. I'll pass one around. We probably don't have time. I'll pass it around tomorrow, and we'll actually be doing it tomorrow. But in Tibetan manuscripts, you'll see that they've been done with leather strips. Here you can see one that I will pass around, that are just holding these multiple sheets together to make covers, more substantial covers in a single leaf. You can also see on this decorative manuscript the holes. There are no actual holes here, but they are preserving stylistically the holes that would have been found on palm leaf poti style manuscripts. And quite often these can be very elaborately decorated in various lotus sort of designs. The other thing then, they had to come up with ink, and there are many different recipes for making Tibetan inks. One would be to take lamp black. In this case, the little flower that's formed on the wick of a butter lamp makes a very, very fine soot, and that would be combined with some glue. Sometimes sugar could be added to the mixture that would also create more of a sheen to the ink. Other items could be added that would increase its flow and alter its flow, and other things could be added for other special instances, sometimes blood or other materials, as Justin was talking about, to make very special inks. And you can see this is the method of preparing it. You would have a smooth surfaced metal container and then a burnishing stone, so you could mix these things in very, very smoothly so the ink then would flow. In the Tibetan area, there are a number of fibers used for paper making, but the one that seems to be most widespread throughout all across the Tibetan plateau is Rechagpa. This is the Stellara chemijasmi. And basically what's used in this, you don't see any bark here like the mulberry bark, but you use the fiber in the root. It's extremely difficult to harvest, to get this out of that very difficult soil, and required tremendous amount of effort to get the fiber from this paper. I'm going to show you a little bit of how it's prepared. So just like preparing bark paper, we have to remove the outer bark, the outer skin of the root. Then you get that inner fiber, and there's a woody core in the middle that needs to be discarded. One of the things, this is, of the different fibers available for paper making, this is considered the third quality, first, second, third. This is the lowest quality, but it has a redeeming quality of being poisonous, and so it's protective for keeping the paper from insects and other vermin. So it's basically breaking it apart and pulling out that material. Then it would be cooked in an alkaline cook, and when it's ready, they say it looks like a fleece that's been wet. So it has that very fibrous quality to it. And then they would form the sheets. I think some of you participated in a workshop here doing lokta paper making using the Nepalese fiber. So basically it's a wooden box with a cotton mesh on the lower side. Would be floated, often just in a little pool that would be created alongside a river. They could bring water up and just float it, and then put the pulp in there, distribute it, and then lift up, and it dries then on the surface of the mold. So you need a lot of molds to make paper. In Tibet, fortunately, with very low humidity and at the high altitude sun, they dry quite quickly. So once you have the paper and you have a calligrapher writing out a text, the text would often be pasted onto a wooden board if you were going to do printing. So this would be a typical printing block. Paper's pasted on here, face down. Then after it's dry, it would be pasted with a wheat paste. Then it would be wetted and rubbed off. The ink is left on the surface of the block. So you're carving, so it'll be wrong reading, and when you print, then it's right reading again. So you can just imagine the amount of work that would go into making this. So, for example, Kanjur with 108 or so volumes, you would have a block like this for every page. Each volume, could range in this number of sheets. And these would all be then stored in a printing house, ready to be taken down and printed. I'm free to look at these after quickly. The wood that was used was primarily Himalayan birch. Again, was what was available there. And it was a nice tight grain. You have these very delicate hairlines that you'd be carving, and so they would keep the block oiled with an oiled rag, like mustard seed oil, rapeseed oil, and that would keep the wood from drying out and possibly splitting. Occasionally you would have a problem like that, and they would cut out an area, put a wooden plug in, and then they could recarve that problematic area. The carving is often done close to where, almost like holding a violin, and you can then use your mouth as in, blowing away the chips while you're working. You can also see, you need to be able to see very well. You have 5 different chisels, gravers to be able to do this kind of work. This is in a place that had no electricity, so it was very quiet and very conducive to this kind of work. In Lhasa, it was at this time, this last time that I went to visit these carvers, there's karaoke, there's this distraction, that distraction, and to get children, young boys trained to sit down and do this kind of work, it's impossible. So in Nyimo, it was traditionally a very good place for artisans to focus on this kind of work. This is the Potala, the Dalai Lama's home, previous home. And down below the Potala, there was a printing house, and there was also Yiktsangkang, an archive storage area, and many, many of these printing blocks were there. So many that the building, the weight of them had started to pull the building away from the hillside. And there was a major effort to try to stabilize that. Then the person that was doing that work, a Westerner, was trying to do that work and a lot of other architectural renovation work in Lhasa, conservation work, was asked to leave the country. So it's very difficult sometimes to create a good working situation there. But we were there on a project, a conservation project. Mark Bernard and I were the 2 conservators. And when we went into this building, we were confronted by this. This was the director of the archives, who was about 6 feet tall. And this will give you some idea of the quantity of materials that were there and the conditions that they were in. These had been gathered from a number of monasteries and other buildings that had been severely damaged. So there was a lot of water damage. And you can see within each of these large bundles were smaller bundles. And these are archival documents, most of them, and they're folded much the same way that the birch bark items that you showed. They were folded up and then folded in, and then as they got wet, these layers have just kind of bonded like a cigar. Mark and I took a look at each other and kind of gasped and went back and had a beer and started to come up with a plan. Here's another type of documents. These were multilingual sort of edicts. They were long, they were kind of a waxy surface paper and very brittle. And so you can see they were put into these bundles and then cinched, and you just hear this crunch, like a bag of potato chips, essentially. And so I think one of the major things that we were able to accomplish was the idea that no, these don't need to be put in these bundles. You're not traveling with them or taking them and moving them anywhere. But we were looking for boxes and ways of flat storage. And so that sort of was adapted as after we had worked there for a while. This is the new archive. So the material that you saw in the earlier frame has been stabilized in this area. And there's a staff of, I think there were 5 people there working in conservation when we were there that we were helping to train. The thing that seemed very important to me was they were doing a kind of conservation work based on a Chinese scroll mounting, where you would have tables, you would paste things out. These would be lined with a Chinese paper or Tibetan paper, but dried then under tension on the wall and then pulled off. When you pulled them off, they were almost like skin, like a piece of parchment, very hard. There was no subtlety at all. The folds that were there, which sometimes, depending on who was writing a document to whom, the folds would be spaced differently. That was sort of embedded information that was lost. And also, if anyone wanted to study the paper fibers, do any kind of analysis, it was all muddied at that point. So we took an ultrasonic welder up to the archive, and we just made mylar pockets that these could be put into. Minor stabilization, little bridges, holding things together, then encapsulate them. At that point, anybody could later take a sample or do any other treatment that might be deemed necessary, depending on what was going to happen to these items. When working in Lhasa, I was very curious to try to find artisans that were doing aspects of bookwork, and this was one of the greatest contacts made there. This is Sundam Norgye, and his family had been scribes back to the 5th Dalai Lama, and he worked in Yemo, and he and his brother both were in Lhasa and worked in the Norbu Linka. But one of his specialties was making a tingshok. Tingshok is that blue-black paper that you see going around, and it's made by taking lampblack, mixing it with brains, yak, sheep, or goat brains, and then ping. This is yak skin glue. What they would do is boil down the yak skins, and then you'd have a sort of gelatin-type material, lay it out on a tray, let it dry, cut it in strips, hang it up, and let it dry in the air. And it's like a glue stick. And it can be then dissolved in water and become a binder. We had an argument. I was trying to repair something with wheat starch paste and some Japanese tissue. And Norgye said, "Why do that? Insects like to eat that starch." And he said, he just licked the end of that and went like that, put the two together, and he said it was good. I didn't say that they also like to eat the protein material in there, but that's okay, you know. So to write on this material, he used gold. And this is this very special type of gold that was made by Newaris in Kathmandu. And it looks like little lentils. It's really very finely powdered. It's a secret way of producing this. I don't know anyone that has written exactly on how this has been produced. When I went to this place to purchase some, they wouldn't tell me anything about it. It's still, they called it a place with a blue door, the makers of this gold. And in Kathmandu, it still has the blue door at the bottom of the stairwell to go up there. But what he would do is mix those materials together, paint them out onto a sheet of paper, and then burnish. So you would burnish that surface and get that high sheen. Many curators have referred to this as Tibetan lacquer paper, but it has nothing to do with lacquer. It's that brain material that creates the sheen. You can see he's got a wooden board underneath, and then he has a pole that's fixed to the ceiling with a agate stone that's on the end of it, and with pressure he would go like this. Tomorrow I've got a sheet that's unburnished and a sheet that's burnished, and you can see how they differ. The one thing that was strange to me is that he was using modern paper. This is almost like a cardstock, a heavyweight cardstock. And I understand it now. It's very difficult to do on the fibrous Tibetan papers. I just met another monk who's doing this in eastern Tibet. He as well is using commercial Chinese papers. So my goal is to learn how to do it back the traditional way, using Tibetan paper, and then reintroduce that to them in Lhasa and in Amdo. You can see him, this is his burnishing tool. This was a piece he was working on. It was 4 volumes, and they were about this size. And so all the paper had to be prepared and then the borders, all of that work done, and then writing out the text. Unbelievable amount of work. Quite often, but not always, the edges around the perimeter of the brain area would be dyed with indigo. Now they're using Chinese blue paints and sometimes buying blue construction paper and then putting the black on top of it. So, in fact, the monk in Amdo asked me if I knew anything about how to do the traditional way. And it seems strange from when we were there in the 90s trying to learn this, and now they're asking back, how do we do this? So it's curious. This is a Vajracchedika manuscript that I commissioned him to make for me, and I brought it so you can have a closer look. You can see some of the elements here. This is the body, speech, and mind represented in this text. You have the text itself is the speech element of the Buddha. There's a stupa in the very back, which is the mind, and then you have the body, the Buddha's image. So Sunam Norgil passed away about 4 years ago. I had gone to interview him again. I hadn't been able to get to Tibet. And I got to Lhasa and found out that he had passed away 2 years before. I'd been asking people if they'd seen him. No one had seen him. And then I asked if there's anyone else that knew how to do this. And they said, we don't know anybody. But I went to a place where I had filmed printers previously and asked there, and he pointed to a door upstairs. And this little guy that was in the picture in 1995 had been with him for many, many years, I think some 20 years, and he now was continuing to do that work. So I was so thrilled to be able to have somebody now that I can continue to work with on this. So I think it's important, one, that we interview oral history projects on the artisans that are still living that are doing this work, try to gain as much knowledge of the material as possible. But I think it's also important then to translate any text that we can find that describe these techniques, and then to follow up with some analytical work to see how these three things all work together. So one of my students became a conservator up at the Indianapolis Museum of Art, which is about an hour away from us. And he put one of his interns on working on a few manuscripts that I took up to have a look at. So this is one, this is there, you can see it better. This is alternating gold and silver lines. And they do this alternating gold and silver work also on metal work. And Christoph Cooper said that they refer to this as Ramalug, so it's goat, sheep. I don't know why they make that, but that's the distinction in what they call when you alternate the gold and silver lines. But I wanted to know, kind of more about the composition. These are letters that are built up. These are, as you'd see in a Western illuminated manuscript, gesso with gilding over the top. This is the same thing, and these are approximately just under 1/4 of an inch thick. I happened to find one in the market that was damaged and revealed what the gesso layer was there. You can see where the gold has come off. And so we did a scan of that, and you could see very clearly that it's a iron-based material for where the gesso was, and there are these deposits of a yellow ochre, very soft material that could be mixed and built up in layers. Sometimes they would squeeze it through like a cake decorating tube. Sometimes they would paint it on and then sort of sculpt with a wooden or bamboo tool. And here you can see then the gold that was on top. So this is that ochre. So it's nice to get samples then of these things as well, to kind of have a collection of reference samples of the different pigments. You can see just how soft, just his nail, he can remove that material. So this is Greg Smith. They've just established a really wonderful, well-funded analytical lab at the Indianapolis Museum of Art. So they've fully equipped to do any kind of testing. So I need to figure out now how to get some kind of a grant. I've never really applied for grants. So that we can begin to cooperate, to be able to have them help us. He's very willing and really excited to work on it, but it's something that I have to figure out how to proceed with. This was a gift. Recently we got a collection of Tibetan and Mongolian manuscripts, woodblock prints, and woodblocks from a woman who spent many years in Mongolia. This is one of the more beautiful manuscripts. But you can see on this, this sheet here the various colors that were used in making this, and I was curious and took it up to Greg, and he became very curious about it. And I took up some samples of different pigments just to show him what I'd been collecting, and so he did Raman work on this one and was able to determine exactly what all of the colors came from. It was very exciting just to do that one sheet. And that, I'm hoping that having some examples now, I can use those to maybe get some support for doing further work. I think that the donor will be really happy that we're actually exploring these things and being able to provide more information. So typically the way Tibetan books were stored was you'd have your book wrapped up in its wrapper, and then it would be between two wooden boards like this, one below, one on top, and then straps wrapped around it. A friend of mine is working on an interesting bumpo text right now that is talking about how I don't want to use parts of the book protect the book from certain elements like fire and water. And he was having questions about it. And the idea, he said, why do the straps protect the book from the element of fire? And I said, well, think about books on a bookshelf, high compressed. When you strap that and it's tight, the fire can lick the sides, char the sides, but not get in and catch fire, really. So the straps protect it from fire element. The boards protect it from the water element. And that would be, a board underneath would keep it up. If there was water leaching in somewhere, it would go under the board and not absorb up into the paper initially. Same on the top. The books would be a little bit narrower than the board, so it acts as sort of a roof for the protection of the book. So I found it very interesting to look at those, some of those kind of texts with him and see how brilliant this was for protecting these delicate items. You can see on the side of the board here description of what's in the book, and then there's letters of the alphabet to indicate what volume the text is. Some of them are quite elaborate. This has a shalkeb, or layers that are protecting the illumination that's underneath there. And you can see how the tingshok's been applied just in these decorative bands on this one. And then you have this dongzar, which hangs out over the side. This is kind of like our spine titling. And then this first layer tells you that's the first letter of the alphabet, Ka. So this is volume 1 of that set. And then you have more detailed information on the inside here. What is it? Legbam Kavadina. So in this volume, Ka, this will tell you what you will find inside there. There's another whole group of Tibetan books that are stitched. And this last trip to Tibet, I was able to ask them. I'd seen probably 500 or so of these in the archives when I was there. And we were never able to get any of them out to look at other than this one set of 4. This is a book that's about a manuscript about this size, by this, by this. And there are 4 volumes, and they have to do with military materials. Leonard van der Kuyp at Harvard's very familiar with this subject matter and was really keen to have a look at them. So I was more interested in looking at the technique of putting them together. This is a structure that we'll be doing at PBI this summer. Also, I think that by knowing the constituents making these kind of manuscripts, we'll have a better ability to care for them. This is a Bumpel manuscript from Columbia University, and you can see this white bloom all over the surface. And I've seen that on other materials, that it's a kind of reaction from the fats. There's the lipids that are in the brain, and these excess fats in a humid environment sort of create this. Some people think it's mold, but it's not. It's kind of soapy-like. I think it's called saponification, and it happens on some recordings. You see it a lot on ethnographic leather work, but it seems to be a real problem with the Tingshuk documents. So I think learning more about that may give us insights into how to clean and keep that from reappearing. I've had to clean it off of leather book bindings before that were heavily oiled in the 70s and 80s, and then come up with this bloom. And you clean it off with distilled water or even water alcohol mix, and it'll come back. It just keeps reappearing. So this is something that's going to take further study. So that's half an hour. I got it? Okay. Anyway, thank you very much, and I welcome questions.
All right, we move. Yes.
Thanks. I was just curious as a very amateur worker, how they prepare the tooling boards. We just go out to the lumber yard and get a perfectly flat piece of lumber, but just look behind that, you want to get the power, you get the hand power. It's not so easy. Have you seen the process?
Yeah, I've seen them using planes, just hand planes. And then the last time I saw some woodworkers, they had Makita hand power planes. It's the same like they would make tea in these big copper cauldrons in the monastery, and they used to, stir. Now they have paint stirrers on Makita drills, and they put them down in the tea. So, yeah. But no, they had hand tools that they would do that work. Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Yes.
Questions about vision of paper. So you can see using the lettering versus the border, that very limited border. Were those different people that were making those, or the same person?
The lettering in the border would be done by the calligrapher, as far as I've seen in my experience with the people that I've witnessed. The paintings would be done by someone else, and quite often you'll see they were done and then adhered onto this. Sometimes they were done right on, but you can feel these, and they've been done almost like a Tonka. A Tonka painter would do that work, and that would be then laid in. They would prepare a space for it with the gold around, and it would be applied then. Yeah, and as far as doing the calligraphy, Norgil was a layperson working, but this last trip I met a monk at Rebgong, and he's extremely good at this, and he took me and introduced me to a couple young people who he's been training to do this. So I'm glad to see that that's going on, even though they are using blue Chinese paint to do it, but it's still, they're keeping alive the making of the Tingshog and the writing in gold. So they're preparing a lot of sheets for him to do the writing. And I suppose as it goes along, he'll find people that were willing to take on that training as well.
Well, I'm going to suggest we stop. We're going to continue our dialogue this afternoon.